The sun had not yet risen over the island of Saipan. It was 4:45 in the morning on July 7th, 1944, and somewhere out in the darkness ahead, thousands of men were screaming, not in pain, in fury. They came like a wall. Between 3,000 and 5,000 Japanese soldiers, some carrying rifles, some carrying only bamboo spears, some carrying nothing at all, surging across the flat coastal plain in the largest banzai charge of the entire Pacific War. The ground shook. The shouting rolled like thunder across Tanapag Plain, rising and rising until it swallowed every other sound on earth. And in the middle of that storm, already bleeding, already broken, already beyond the point where most men would have given up, Private Thomas Baker raised his weapon one more time. He would not leave. He would not be carried. He would not stop. He only had one request. Give me 8 bullets, and leave me here. If you've never heard the name Thomas Baker, you're not alone. He never made the front pages. He never came home. But what he did in the final hours of his life, propped against a tree on a ruined volcanic island facing thousands of enemy soldiers, stands as one of the most quietly extraordinary acts of courage in American military history. If stories like this matter to you, real history, real men, real sacrifice, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell. We're here every week, making sure these men are not forgotten. Thomas Alexander Baker was born on June 25, 1916, in Troy, New York, a small industrial city on the Hudson River, upstate, the kind of place that built things and raised people quietly. He grew up there, finished high school there, and in October of 1940, over a year before Pearl Harbor, he walked into the Army recruiting office in Troy and signed his name. He was 24 years old. He wasn't drafted. He volunteered. The 27th Infantry Division that Baker joined had deep roots in that part of New York. The 105th Infantry Regiment, his regiment, traced its lineage back to the 2nd New York Infantry, a unit that had fought in the Spanish-American War and in the First World War. Many of the men in its ranks had grown up within 30 miles of each other. They were neighbors. Some were friends. A few, like Baker's fellow soldier Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, were from Troy itself. The 27th Division, a National Guard formation federalized in 1940, had already seen hard fighting by the time it arrived in the Pacific. They were soldiers in the truest sense of the word, ordinary American men turned by training and necessity into something harder and more capable than they had ever imagined themselves to be. By June of 1944, Thomas Baker was a private in Company A, 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry Regiment. He was about to become something more. The island of Saipan sits in the Mariana Islands, roughly 1,500 miles south of Tokyo, close enough, American planners knew, to put the new B-29 Superfortress bombers within reach of the Japanese home islands. Taking Saipan wouldn't just be a tactical victory. It would open the door to Japan's doorstep. The Japanese knew it too. Operation Forager, the assault on the Marianas, launched on June 15, 1944. The 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions hit the beaches first. The 27th Infantry Division went in behind them. The island was 12 miles long and brutally defended. Volcanic ridges, deep caves carved into the rock, ravines and jungle that swallowed men and artillery alike. The Japanese had named their defensive strongpoints with grim imagination. American soldiers came to call them Death Valley and Purple Heart Ridge. The fighting would last 25 days. Thomas Baker arrived on Saipan on June 16, 1944, landing at a Jingan Point on the island's southwest coast. Within days, he would make his first mark. June 19th, Baker's company was trying to advance up a ridge. They couldn't. Enemy automatic weapons and small arms fire from heavily fortified Japanese positions had the entire company pinned down. Every move forward drew fire. The ridge held them in place like a hand pressed flat on their backs. Nobody ordered Thomas Baker to do what he did next. He picked up a bazooka. He dashed forward alone, across open ground, to within 100 yards of the Japanese position. Enemy rifle fire and machine gun fire tracked him every step of the way. He knelt, he took aim, he fired. The first round hit, a second round finished the job. The Japanese emplacement that had stopped his entire company was gone. Just like that, Company A could move again. That was the first day Baker distinguished himself. it would not be the last. In the days that followed, as the 27th Division fought northward up the narrowing island, through jungle and across open fields that offered no cover, Thomas Baker made himself useful in a way that most men would never volunteer for. He took up position at the rear. When a unit moves through potentially hostile terrain, the men in front get the attention. The men in the rear are left exposed to anything that was missed, bypassed, or hiding. It is a job that requires vigilance and nerve. It is the kind of job that nobody wants. Baker wanted it. Moving in his self-appointed position at the back of his company's advance, he came upon two heavily fortified enemy positions that had been bypassed by the main body of troops. Inside them, 2 Japanese officers and 10 enlisted men. 12 enemy soldiers, 1 American. Baker attacked without hesitation. He killed all 12 of them. 500 yards farther, he found 6 more Japanese soldiers, concealed behind American lines, waiting. He destroyed all 6. In 2 engagements, 1 man had neutralized 18 enemy fighters who might otherwise have attacked from the rear and turned a march into a catastrophe. Thomas Baker, somewhere along the way, had become something that resists easy definition. Not reckless, calculated, not unafraid, simply unwilling to let fear decide for him. By the evening of July 6, the battle for Saipan was approaching its final act. 3 weeks of fighting had driven the Japanese defenders into the northern corner of the island. Their backs were against the sea. The 2nd Marine Division had been pulled into reserve. The narrowing front was held by the 27th Infantry Division, with the 4th Marines on its right flank. The 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 105th Infantry Regiment, Baker's Regiment, held the line on the western side, near the coastal plain at Tanapag. They were dug in about 250 yards from the beach. They were not in a strong position. There was a gap in the line, perhaps 250 to 300 yards, between the 1st and 2nd Battalions. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, commanding the 1st Battalion, was aware of it. He requested reinforcements. None were available. In the darkness of July 6th, Japanese patrols began moving along the American perimeter, probing, searching for weaknesses. They found the gap. On the other side of the island, the overall Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, had already made his decision. He had assembled everything he had left: armed soldiers, wounded soldiers, and some civilians armed with nothing but bamboo spears and hand grenades, into one massive final assault. His orders were clear. Every man was to fight until he died, killing as many Americans as possible before the end. Saito himself would not survive to see the outcome. He died, some accounts say by his own hand, the same evening. What he set in motion would not stop. The attack came at approximately 4:45 in the morning on July 7, 1944. The sound reached the American positions before anything else did. A vast rising roar of voices, the clinking of equipment, the crashing of men through vegetation, all of it building until soldiers later described it the way you might describe a freight train or a flood. Something with physical weight. Something that didn't stop. Between 3,000 and 5,000 Japanese troops hit the line of the 105th Infantry Regiment in a wave. They found the gap between the 2 battalions. They poured through it. They advanced 1,000 yards past the American front line, swamping artillery positions, overrunning command posts, flooding through the rear areas. Marines to the east who could see the plain below watched in disbelief as the line broke and men waded into the sea to escape the human tide. It was, and remains, the largest banzai charge of World War II. Into that chaos, into the first moments of that nightmare, Thomas Baker was already fighting. He was wounded early in the attack. The records do not specify the nature of the wounds, only that they were serious. But Baker stayed in the line. He kept firing. The Japanese were close, sometimes, the official record states, as close as 5 yards, close enough to see faces, close enough that there was no longer any meaningful distinction between a battle and a brawl. He fired until he ran out of ammunition. He kept fighting even then, using his rifle as a weapon in the oldest sense, until it was, in the language of his Medal of Honor citation, battered to uselessness from hand-to-hand combat. At some point in the violence, a comrade reached Baker. The man tried to evacuate him, lifting him, carrying him perhaps 50 yards to the rear. In the effort, that comrade was himself wounded. Baker had seen enough. He refused to be moved any further, not from stubbornness, not from pride. He refused because he understood with perfect clarity that any man who tried to carry him was risking his life to do it, and he had decided he would not be the reason another American soldier died. I prefer to die rather than risk the lives of any more of my friends. That is what the record says, he told them. In the chaos and noise and blood of that morning, that is what he said. They placed him against a small tree, propped up, sitting, facing the direction the Japanese were coming from. Another American soldier came past and offered to help. Baker refused again. He asked the man for one thing only. "Leave me your pistol. Give me what ammunition you have left." 8 rounds remained in that pistol when it was pressed into Baker's hand. When last seen alive, Sergeant Thomas Alexander Baker, the Army posthumously promoted him in recognition of what he had done, was propped against that tree, pistol in hand, calmly facing the enemy. Calmly. That word appears in the official citation. It was chosen deliberately by the men who wrote it, men who had been there, men who knew what that morning had looked and sounded and felt like. Of all the words available to them, they chose that one. Calmly. When American soldiers found his body, he was in the same position. The pistol was empty. 8 Japanese soldiers lay dead in front of him. Every bullet had found its mark. Thomas Baker was 27 years old. He is buried at the Gerald B. H. Solomon Saratoga National Cemetery in Schuylerville, New York, not far from Troy, where he was born, where he grew up, where he walked into a recruiting office in the fall of 1940 and signed his name. On May 9, 1945, less than a year after his death, and before the war was over, the Medal of Honor was awarded to him posthumously. His citation was signed in the name of Congress by the President of the United States. The words of that citation describe a man who, over the course of 19 days on a volcanic island in the Pacific, made a consistent and deliberate choice, again and again, to place himself between danger and the men around him. He picked up a bazooka and charged alone. He took the most exposed position at the rear of his column when no one asked him to. He attacked fortified enemy positions that outnumbered him more than 12 to 1. He refused evacuation when he was already gravely wounded. He chose a tree and a pistol over safety, because safety had a price he wasn't willing to pay. He was not a famous general. He held no high rank. He was a private, then a sergeant, one of the countless American men of that generation who answered a call and gave everything. But the story of Thomas Baker matters for a reason that goes beyond courage. It is a story about a specific kind of decision. The decision to protect other people, even when it costs you everything, even when the cost is your own life, even when the alternative was entirely defensible and no one would have blamed you. He had every right to let them carry him. He had every right to save himself. He chose not to. In November of 2009, a memorial was installed at the Rensselaer County Office Building in Troy, New York. It honors Baker and 2 other local men, Major General Ogden J. Ross and Lieutenant Colonel William J. O'Brien, who died on the same plane within hours of Baker, and who also received the Medal of Honor posthumously. 3 men from the same small city, 3 men who went to the same island and did not come back. 3 medals awarded for what happened in the space of a few terrible hours before sunrise on July 7, 1944. Troy, New York gave more than it should have had to give. The battle for Saipan was declared secure on July 9, 1944, 2 days after Baker died. The cost had been enormous. More than 4,000 Japanese soldiers died in the Banzai Charge alone. The 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 105th Infantry, the men Baker had fought beside, suffered 406 killed and 512 wounded, nearly destroyed. 7 medals of honor were awarded for actions during the Battle of Saipan. All 7 were posthumous. In the months that followed, B-29 superfortresses began flying from the airfields the Americans had built on that island, bombing raids against cities on the Japanese home islands, including Tokyo. The strategic purpose of taking Saipan was fulfilled. The war was shortened. Lives were saved. Thomas Baker never knew that. He died not knowing how it would end. He did his part anyway. There is a particular kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make speeches. It doesn't ask for recognition. It simply looks at the situation in front of it. The gap in the line, the pinned-down company, the charging thousands, the 8 remaining bullets, and it acts. Thomas Baker's courage was that kind. Quiet in its way, even when the world around it was not. Stubborn in the deepest sense, a refusal to let other men pay the price for his own survival. When they found him against that tree, the pistol was empty. The enemy was dead. And Sergeant Thomas Alexander Baker, of Troy, New York, of Company A, 105th Infantry Regiment, 27th Infantry Division, United States Army, had kept his word. He had used every last round. If this story moved you, if you believe men like Thomas Baker deserve to be remembered, share this video with someone who should hear it. Leave a comment. Tell us which story we should tell next. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe. Ring that bell. These men lived and died in service to something larger than themselves. The least we can do is make sure they are not forgotten. We'll see you in the next video.